so the topic of today's webinar is best practices for building and running a church website. This is something which is certainly near and dear to my heart, as you will see as we go forward today. So this is one of a new series of webinars we've begun offering this year. And I know at least one of you, or maybe a couple of you, have been to a webinar before. And if you receive our email newsletter, you've probably started seeing this year this phrase that we're using, welcome newcomers and equip the saints. And this, of course, is the job of the local church. The mission of the local church is, as the Westminster Confession of Faith puts it, to be involved in the gathering and perfecting of the saints, to pray for that, to work for that. Ultimately, of course, that's the job of the Holy Spirit and the appointed means of grace, preaching of the word and ministration of the sacraments. But of course, in God's providence and in His grace, we have a role to play in that as well as members of local churches. And so I thought that these two sentences kind of capture succinctly what local churches are called to do. Welcome newcomers, to invite visitors, to come see what they're about and what they stand for, and also to equip the saints. To equip those people who are members of the church, as Ephesians puts it, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. That's why God has given pastors and elders to churches to do that. And so we at Five More Talents have a very, very small kind of ancillary supporting role to this. But our mission is to help you in your mission as parts of a local church to welcome newcomers and to equip the saints. And we do this by harnessing the power of mass media, and in particular web technology. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at 5 best practices that we have found in 10 plus years of working with scores of church websites, both throughout North America as well as in the United Kingdom, particularly Scotland. And we're going to look at these 5 best practices, and I'll have some illustrations of churches that are doing a good job at each of these best practices, particularly the first 4. But before we get to, and we'll also conclude with some next steps. But before we get to that, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, which, since there's some of you in this webinar today that are on our email list but aren't currently a customer, thought it would be good to give a little bit of an introduction. Even for those of you who have been customers for a while, it will be a good refresher. So who we are. My name is Daniel Voss. That's me there, second from the right. And I am I wear a bunch of different hats, but I'm basically the project manager for all of our website development projects. To the left is Andrew Gerber, our church website setup and support specialist. He is joined our team working part-time in November 2018 and is currently working on his Master of Divinity studies and working with us part-time as well. To my right is Jace Bauer, who joined our team earlier this year, and he is helping us make sure that we get a monthly email newsletter out to you. Make sure that you're aware of the services that we provide and the benefits that they offer and all that kind of thing. He's doing a wonderful job. And if you got, obviously you got the email about this webinar, and so I'm grateful to Jace for helping me make that happen. And then also Doug Voss, who is the founder and president and continues to be involved in our day-to-day, week-to-week operations, especially with our ongoing support. For those of you who are existing customers, you've certainly interacted with him in ongoing support of your website. So that's who we are. We also just this week added an additional part-time team member. His name is Taylor, and he provides us with some really good coding skills and information technology technical skills that I'm really excited about. So I guess there's 5 of us now, so there's 5 talents. So now I guess we need to make 5 more talents out of that. What do we do? So basically it breaks down into 3 categories. I'll actually start from the bottom. Managed WordPress hosting. WordPress is the content management system that we use for the websites that we build and support. And managed WordPress hosting is in many ways the core of what we do. It is making sure that your website continues to run, and not only that, but that you're able to take advantage of advances in technology, and that you have top quality customer support going forward with your website. I'll explain a little bit more about this as we go forward. Secondly, website development. That's a big part of what we do, developing new sites for churches, for parachurch organizations, for authors. But we definitely got our start working with local churches, and that's still very much at the core of what we do. And then the other thing that we provide is training, equipping, and consulting. And this webinar is an example of that. Having a website with really good technology and great functionality doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you don't know how to use it. So what we have found in 10 plus years of serving local churches and other organizations is that it's really important to train and equip those whom we serve. So how do we go about providing these services? Well, just briefly, we emphasize not only technology, but also the importance of having good, well-defined processes to use the technology effectively to get the results that you want, the results that you're looking for, as well as developing people, be it our internal people, members of our team, or folks such as yourself who have a website or want to have a website and want to be able to operate the website, to manage the content on the site. So we look at all 3 of these things, and everything that we do is not just, we want to use technology to serve people. That's our goal. And again, why do we do what we do? It's to help you in your mission as leaders, as servants in local churches, to help you in your mission to welcome newcomers and equip the saints through the services that we provide, harness the power of web technology. If I can just give a little bit of a kind of a personal anecdote of that, you can see here me and my wife, Rebecca, and our kids, Patrick, Aaron, and Cameron. And this is us standing in the lobby area, entry fellowship area of our new church building that, by God's grace, was open for the first services this past Easter Sunday. And we're so thankful for where the Lord has taken our church. And how this relates, this kind of relates to why I'm offering this webinar. And it's just going back to 2006, 2007, our church began as a church plant. We started meeting in a school cafeteria, and at the time I was a high school teacher. Loved the subject matter I was teaching, but the Lord was still kind of molding me into the career path and the life work that He wanted me to have. And so the first church website I ever worked on was for our home church, Christ the King Presbyterian Church here in Roanoke, Virginia. And it has just been so exciting to see what the Lord has done in gathering a body of believers, a new body of believers, and how He's been at work to continue to sanctify us. And so this really is a privilege to get to do what I do every week, every day, to work with local churches, people in local churches such as yourselves, and to do what I can to share what I've learned to equip you in the work that you've called to do. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into why I do what I do. All right, so let me give you just let's get into the meat of today's presentation. I'm going to start off with a few examples of recent projects that we've done. As I said, we've been serving local churches with their website development, hosting needs since 2009. So it's about 10 years now. And so we've worked with dozens and dozens of churches, primarily Presbyterian and Reformed churches, confessional Presbyterian and Reformed churches. Those are the churches of which we are a part. Those are the churches that we love. Those are the churches that we believe that God has entrusted so many wonderful and beautiful resources to. And so here are a couple of examples of recent projects. The first one is Grace Orthodox Presbyterian Church in Elburn, Illinois. It's a little ways, a little ways west of Chicago. And we've had the privilege of working with them for, I don't know, probably for most of those 10 years. But just earlier this year that we partnered with them to redesign their website. And this is what the homepage looks like. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So I would say this is an example of a church website that is following best practices. And here's an example of just what Carol, the woman we worked with from the church, had to say about us. She said that we're great to work with, respond quickly to questions and requests, and we also think outside the box to deliver economical solutions. So we're really thankful for that. Here's another example of a church that we've worked with recently. This is Columbia PCA in Columbia, Maryland. And here's the logo that we designed for them. This is what their homepage looks like. And one of their pastors, PD Mayfield, talked about our customer care. And that is something that we have found that that you all really appreciate about what we're doing. So that hopes it gives you a taste of kind of our heart and our how we go about doing what we do. We want to provide great customer care. All right, so let's get into the best practices. So the first best practice is this: to use a content management system. This may or may not be a familiar phrase to you, but basically, if you just think about the three words in that phrase, content management system, it's a system. Specifically, it's computer software. It's web-based software that you can access from your web browser and log into an administrative dashboard, such as what you see on the screen from your web browser. And the purpose of it is to help you manage your content. So content, those would be things like text, images, audio files for your sermons, potentially videos, events, forms, information about the people who are the leaders of your church. All of these things are examples of content. And then to manage that content means to be able to add new sermons or events or pages or blog posts, to add new ones, to delete them, to change them, and to basically do all of that without having to get into any sort of code, any HTML code or CSS code or PHP code or JavaScript code. That's what the purpose of a content management system is to make it possible for you to edit the content on your website without having to use computer code, basically. All right. So what you see on the screen is an example of the content management system that we use for all of the websites that we've developed and we support, and that's WordPress. You've probably heard of it, and it is the #1 most widely used content management system in the world. And I think it's cool that it's called WordPress, because as Presbyterian and Reformed churches, we really value the Word of God. We're people of the book that He has given us. But anyway, it's called WordPress, and this is what the dashboard looks like, and it gives you an interface to edit pages, posts, forms, sermons, events, people, and you can do that without having to get into any website code. So the idea is that this makes it possible for lay people, for people who don't have a computer science degree or aren't a coder or something like that, to actually manage the content on their website. Now, a few years ago, we did a study of about 1,500 Presbyterian churches, and we wrote our own little program that went and looked at about 1,500 websites to see what kind of content management system they were using. And you can see a summary of the results here. We found that about 12% at the time were not using any content management system that we are aware of. And you can see a number of less popular content management systems: Squarespace, Joomla, Weebly. In some cases, there was a DNS failure, which means perhaps the website was down. But and then there there was 34.9%. You can see that were unknown, which may mean that there was next time we can, we run this script and conduct this research, there's probably some refinements we can do to it to get a better sense of what those content management systems that we don't know are. But one of the findings I want to highlight to you is that 27% of churches use WordPress as a content management system. And that's the content management system that we use. One thing should be very clear here is that it appears that the vast majority of churches are already using a content management system. And chances are probably pretty good if you're on this webinar, your church is already, if you have a website, you're already using a content management system. If you're not, that's a pretty easy improvement that you need to consider making as soon as possible, is to adopt a content management system, and we recommend using WordPress. Now, why is this so important? And the analogy that I use, why is using a content management system so important? The analogy I use is, think about some of your favorite magazines. A couple of my favorite are Table Talk and World Magazine. And conduct a thought experiment of, where does the value of that website come from? Okay, is it the design? Is it the graphic design, or is it the content? Well, obviously it's something of both, but I would submit to you that over 80% of the value of these magazines comes from the content that they put into the design every month. Think about it. Would you keep your subscription to Table Talk or to World or whatever your favorite magazine is if they didn't publish new devotionals, new articles, new news stories or editorials? No, of course not. So the point that I'm making is that I would say that 80% plus of the value of these magazines comes from the content they produce. And it's the same, or at least similar, with your church website. 80% of the value of that, 80% plus of the value of that comes from the content that you put on your church website. Yes, the design is important. You don't want to have a bad graphic design. You don't want to have functionality that's broken, forms that don't work. But the vast majority of the value of your website comes from the content that you put on it. So that's why we recommend using a content management system. All right, let's go on to the next best practice. And this is to prioritize the needs of first-time visitors. I've been reflecting recently on this verse from Romans: welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. And I'm not a pastor. I'm not an exegete. I haven't been to seminary, but it seems like that's a pretty important principle. Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you. And so I argue that this is crucially important for a church website. It's a biblical principle, but also if you think about it practically, this is especially if you're a church plant, like the church that I'm a part of was about 10 years ago. We were meeting in in the cafeteria of a school, right? So you don't really have a physical presence in the community. And so it's been really interesting as the new church building has opened, we've had people that that have been driving by on the road and come to worship with us on a Sunday morning. And one person asked, you know, are you a new church, or have you been around for a while? And so there is the point I'm making is that if you don't have a church building, then this may be the only way that your church website might be the only way that a first-time visitor can find out anything about you, other than, you know, a personal contact with a member of the church. So for both of those reasons, just from the biblical principle, but also just for the practical considerations, I think it's important to prioritize the needs of first-time visitors. Here's a couple of examples of this. So Columbia PCA, they have an entire section on their site called I'm New. And this is just the first page. They actually have 2 or 3 sub-pages that are simply devoted to questions people ask if they've never been to the church before. So that's a question for you to ask yourself. Do you have a section on your site that is devoted to the questions that first-time visitors ask? And churches handle this different ways. This is not about dumbing things down in a unhealthy, seeker-sensitive way, seeker-driven. No, it's simply about being welcoming, being approachable, again, in the spirit of that biblical principle from Romans 15. Here's another example. This one is from Grace OPC in Elburn, Illinois. That example I gave you at the beginning of the webinar. Oops, let me try to fix this here. This is from, they have a menu item or a tab on their site that's called Visit. And again, they focus on, you know, what are the questions that people ask when they're first thinking about visiting. And here's just an excerpt from their page. They have some photos, they explain the order of worship, they define some terms. So they're throwing out the welcome mat, right? they're smiling at people that are looking for a church to visit and maybe have never been there before. It's very important for church websites to do this. That brings us to the third best practice. It's also important to make the website useful for members too. There's lots of different ways to do this. One of the ways in which Grace OPC in Elburn, Illinois does this is simply through their calendar. They have an events page on their site, and this is what it looks like for June, and they provide information about their events. So that's something that is useful for members. Another example, this is a church that we support in Modesto, California. And they have an entire section of their site. This is a multi-staff, a large church. An entire section of their site called Connect, which gives people lots of different ways that they connect. So this application of this best practice is going to be different depending on the size of your church, depending on your philosophy of ministry, and so on and so forth. But one way or another, it's also important to make the website useful for members. And I would just highlight the two ways that churches often do that is through the calendar and through something like this Connect, which if you were to look at these pages, what you would see is a lot of them talk about who are the contact people for these different ministries, and also having a form where people can send an email to them. All right, this brings us to the fourth best practice. Update your website on a weekly basis. So here's an example from Grace OPC in Elburn again. You can see that they've been doing a good job uploading their sermons every week. And they have some information about how their schedule is going to change a little bit during summertime. And if you're using a content management system such as WordPress, such as we always set up, then these kind of changes are easy to do, right? If you can use Facebook or Microsoft Word, then there's no reason why you can't go in, or some other volunteers can't go into your site and make these kind of changes as well. This is a simple example. We also see churches such as First ARP in North Carolina, Burlington, North Carolina. Their pastor, Brian Kratz, will actually, this page, he updates it every week. And he talks about what the sermon's going to be, and what are the Sunday school classes, and he does a good job of keeping this updated every week. There is some wisdom required here, because if you're going to have a section of your site that is going to be updated on a weekly basis, then you have to make sure you allocate the time and delegate or delegate that to someone who is going to be able to be faithful in carrying that out. Because if you were to miss a week or two, then it starts to become a less useful page. But I think this is an example of a church that's really following, kind of setting the bar pretty high for keeping their website up to date. And they're just an ordinary church, but they recognize the principle that you see newspapers and magazines use all the time, which is that the content of your site is where most of the value comes from. The last one I'm going to mention is to implement information security. Now, this is really important when you're using a content management system, because rather than, when I say using a content management system, rather than just having a kind of like the old way, the original way of making a website, putting together, using Microsoft Front Page or something like that, and putting together a collection of pages and putting them on a web server, and so on and so forth. If you're using a content management system, you are using a web-based software. And so there are usernames and passwords, and there's a database involved. And so you do need to be more vigilant about information security. Let me just give you an example of why I believe this is so important. So on the screen, you can see this picture of the crowds. I believe they're in Paris in France. And this was in response in 2015 to the horrible tragedy where there was the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. And that 2015 event was kind of actually impacted some of the websites that we support, because in response to these protests in France, there were actually hackers that were sympathizing with ISIS, that started to go around and vandalizing websites, and so unfortunately, what we found in 2015 is that a few of our customer websites wound up with an ISIS black flag on them, and they had been vandalized. And so that was a wake-up call to us as a team that we needed to up our game as far as information security. And it's a very common thing that people neglect when they have a WordPress site or using some other kind of content management system, is they think that, oh, well, we're just a small website, we're just a small church, and we don't have to worry about that. Actually, you do. History proves it, is that there are hackers that are maybe not looking for credit card information, but they're just maybe looking to essentially deface or vandalize a website. One of the most simple things you can do is just to use strong passwords. So that's one thing that you could start doing today if you're not doing that. And WordPress will certainly help with that. They rate for you whether your password is strong or not. But there's a lot of other things that can be done and need to be done to have to keep your website safe. That's part of what the managed WordPress hosting service that we provide each month for our customers. That's a big part of it, is implementing security measures to prevent the various kind of cyber threats that are out there. So just in summary, here are 5 best practices that we have found in working with churches for 10 years now that are important for, we believe, for every local church website to implement. First is to use a content management system such as WordPress. Secondly, to prioritize the needs of first-time visitors. Third, to make the website useful for members as well. Fourth, update your website on a weekly basis. And then fifth, to implement proactive information security practices. And that brings us to the end of the content that I have prepared. I have on the screen a link, danielvoss.youcanbook.me, where I'd be glad if there's something in this webinar that has piqued your interest. I'd be happy to schedule a one-on-one web conference with you to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll also be emailing this link out to each of you as well. What I'm going to do now, though, since we do have a few minutes left before the next webinar, is we have about 10 minutes. I'm going to stop the recording, if I can figure out how to do that.